Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be sharing with you an important insight for your inner work practice. Alright, so in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you an insight for your inner work practice. So if you're doing any kind of inner work like shadow work, this is going to be really helpful for connecting to aspects of yourself that you're not yet conscious of and to be able to develop yourself into your highest and best version. And if you have any goals that you would like to reach, this is also a really helpful insight for that as well. And that insight is that opposites grow out of one another. So to understand this concept, one of the things that's really important to understand is the symbolism of the Tao. And the Tao is also known as the yin and yang symbol. And so on the yang side, there's like white with a black dot in it. And then on the yin side, there is the black with a white dot in it. And so basically, the light side represents the positive polarity and the dark side represents the negative polarity. And the fact that there is a white dot in the black and a black dot in the white represents that everything contains the seed of its opposite. And there's a certain kind of intensity to that seed of the opposite in that polarity. And so on the dark side with the white dot in it, that white dot is going to represent the most positive. It's like the diamond in the rough. It is the most positive expression, more intensely positive than just the purely yang side of things. And then on the yang side of things, with that little black dot, it's going to mean that the most intensely negative things grow out of the most positive polarity things if we polarize into that. And so this is what makes it really important for us to integrate the opposites, to be able to accept both the positive and the negative polarity, because out of the positive polarity, the most negative things grow, and out of the negative polarity, the most positive things grow. So let's take even, for example, shadow work, which is a perfect example of integrating sort of the negative or the dark side of things. The most positive potentials grow from embracing that side of things. That's where you find the diamond in the rough. That's where you get this integration with these parts of yourself, and you get to unlock these positive potentials. But let's take the opposite of that, where somebody tries to identify as much with positivity as possible and tries to identify solely with goodness without seeing anything negative within themselves or without embracing their sort of dark side or negative side. What ends up happening is that festers underneath the floorboards and then comes up above the surface to create negative circumstances, and you get the most negative expressions of those shadow aspects. So when it's the case that you embrace the negative polarity, you actually get the most positive expressions. When you resist the negative polarity, you get the more negative expressions. And so it's really important for you to be holistic and to recognize that opposites grow out of one another. And if you want to have the most positive expressions, you have to be able to embrace the yin polarity or the negative polarity. So I'm going to give you some examples that are more in the positive, and then I'll also give you some examples that are more in the negative. So let's take a positive and negative polarity of you have independence and you have dependency. And so independence would be more in the positive polarity, more in the yang, and then you have dependence, which would be more in the yin polarity or the yin. And so if you have an integrative relationship with those things, if you meet your dependency needs, then you're going to be able to step more into your authentic self because you're going to have more support for your authentic self. Now let's say that we take the same polarity and we flip it around and we call these two things different things. And so let's say that the yin polarity is now isolation, and then the yang polarity is now togetherness. These are two different ways to say the same thing and two different facets. One where you're talking about the same thing and it has a yin and a yang quality, and the other one the same thing. You have a yin and a yang quality for the opposite. So that which is independence, in this paradigm could actually be loneliness in another paradigm. That which is dependency in this paradigm can actually be togetherness and connection in the opposite paradigm. And so when it comes to understanding positive and negative, it really depends on what your perspective is. So if it's the case that you meet your needs for independence and you face with the loneliness that comes along with that, then you're able to know who you are, and you're actually able to kind of put out the beacon and to attract in people who are on a like-minded frequency with you, so that you actually can feel together with other people, as opposed to feeling like you're just on a totally different wavelength from other people because you don't know yourself well enough yet. Or let's say that you're fully focused on self-sufficiency and independence, and you're like, I don't want to be dependent on anybody. I don't want to have to rely on anybody. I don't really trust that to happen. What ends up happening is that you don't have the social support that you need to fully step into your individuated self, to fully step into the fully formed version of yourself. So you can see the importance in embracing both sides of the polarity, because it's really just a matter of perspective as to whether or not we see one thing as positive or one thing as negative. It just depends on what perspective we're looking from. Another fairly positive example of how opposites grow out of one another is how endings always come out of beginnings, because you have to have a beginning to get to an end, but also from endings also come new beginnings. And so basically the ending and the beginning is exactly the same in this sense. And in the same way that you can see this in nature, where it's like, let's say dead things become the fertilizer for new living things to grow from them. Yet another example of this that's in the positive is that expansion grows out of contraction. So let's say that you have all of these different options, and what you have to do is you have to sacrifice the millions and millions of options that you have to choose just one, and you have to kind of drown your darlings in this sense. That way you can contract your perspective down and you can take the one particular path. But through taking that one particular narrow path and contracting yourself down, you're able to expand into an adventure that you otherwise wouldn't be able to have. And so in this way, out of contraction comes expansion. But likewise, whenever it's the case that you're taking that path, you're also going to experience contraction along the way. And from contraction comes meaning, and through meaning comes more expansion. And so another way to think about the polarity of expansion and contraction is actually like devotion and commitment versus kind of waffling around and like not knowing which direction to go in. Also, many times your ability to be with and experience negative things influences whether or not you can experience a positive thing. So for example, you have to be willing to sit with your negative feelings in order to feel your more positive feelings. Also, your willingness to fail. If you are willing to fail, you're more likely to succeed. And so your willingness to experience failure is what your capacity to succeed grows out of. Now, there are also negatives that come along with this, where negatives can grow out of their opposite if they are not embraced. So for example, if somebody is not willing to sort of choose one singular path and wants to maintain themselves in this like perspective of expansion, and they want so much possibility, and they're trying to make sure that they continue to have more and more and more options and trying to go more and more toward expansion, what can happen is that they never actually take the journey. They never actually begin. They never actually commit themselves or devote themselves to a particular path. And so in their refusal to contract, life causes them to contract automatically because they're so held on to expansion of possibilities that they never get to go deeper into anything and expand through the dimension of depth. Also, another example of the negatives of not integrating opposites. So let's say that somebody is dealing with enmeshment, and within enmeshment, it's a lot of self-sacrifice and conceptualizing of one's own purpose and the meaning of one's life as being to serve somebody or something outside of themselves only, and not to live for themselves. And so an enmeshment dynamic could be where somebody can't think about themselves as an individual and having an individual story, but merely as a member of like the story of their family. And when this happens, what ends up happening is that those independence needs are trying to get met through the family story. And so that person can tend to monopolize the family story and consider themselves the very central main character of that family story to try to get those independence needs met. And they can become quite controlling to the people around them because of that reason. And so in this way, this self-sacrifice can tend to lead to this almost like, hyper self-focus that grows out of the selflessness. Also, the unwillingness to face with uncomfortable emotions tends to propagate those same uncomfortable emotions, and those things can tend to fester underneath the floorboards. Or if we're not willing to let go of things, or we're not willing to face with endings and to face with grief, we don't ever experience renewal, and we don't ever experience newness and novelty coming through in that experience of letting go of the old. And so in this way, you have to be willing to experience death to really fully truly live. So to describe this further, to understand what it is that you get from being able to hold space for both sides within a given polarity, is I want you to think about it a bit like an infinity symbol. And so let's say that you have the positive polarity over here and the negative polarity over here, and then if you have no resistance to either of these polarities and you're willing to experience both and hold space for both, what ends up happening is that you're able to do a full full circuit with that infinity symbol. When it's the case that you go into opposition to one of those polarities, usually the one that you consider to be negative, what ends up happening is that energy, that circuit can't be sort of seen through to the end. And so you end up with this kind of stuckness and this stagnation. And so if you can imagine, there's kind of a progression that happens when you're able to use that infinity symbol in this way and to kind of continue to go up and to expand through holding space for opposites. Whereas if you're not able to do that, you just stay stuck, you stay stagnant, and nothing new can grow from that. And so if somebody's not willing to experience the negative, they end up staying stuck. Whereas if somebody embraces the negative, that oftentimes enables them to have more positive expressions that grow out of that negative. And from there, they eventually run into another negative expression where they have the potential for more positive polarities to grow out of those negative polarities. And so if you can see negativity as the garden in which positive seeds can grow, that's a really important metaphor for noting why it's important to have a more holistic perspective and to hold space for those negative polarities. And so in order to apply this insight practically, that opposites grow out of one another, you want to look at your life and also your goals, and you want to see where you have stagnation, areas where things just aren't working out, where you're constantly trying to succeed, but you seem not to be able to. And from there, what you want to do is you want to look for ways that you're trying to re-up and re-up and re-up on the positive polarity without embracing the negative polarity. So for example, one of the things that's come up like this recently for me is that I've had this thing around, okay, I want to achieve things, I want to be self-sufficient, I want to be able to be successful, all of these more individualistic goals. And one of the things that I've realized recently is that that's actually quite out of alignment with me, because I actually have to go to the opposite polarity first. I have to first meet my dependency needs and be open to connecting outside of myself to actually meet those, let's say, goals over here, and to meet those more independence related goals. So it's almost like I keep trying to re-up and re-up and re-up with independence without actually meeting those dependency needs. So now I'm having to focus on things like ordinariness and feeling connected and being able to not be sort of the star of the show, but to be kind of a side character in things, and to be able to feel that sense of connection and to feel like I don't have to do it all by myself, but that I can rely on people outside of myself and I can exercise that trust. And so the way that things have to go, it almost pulls me in the opposite direction from where I think I have to go. But in going in that direction, I sort of have a sort of trust that things will come back around to the opposite polarity again, similar to that yin and yang symbol. So it's like if I meet these dependency needs, I trust that that will be the polarity with which these more positive goals grow out of somewhere down the line. And so you can take this same insight and apply it to whatever it is that you're going for. So if you notice yourself trying to go toward a certain positive goal, think about what is the opposite of that goal and what ways can I actually integrate the opposite of that goal. So let's say for me, it's like, being able to incorporate dependence into my goal of independence. Maybe for you, it's something totally different. And so thinking about that, like let's say if you have a goal to get into a relationship, and it's like, oftentimes it's like there's that idea of trying to find the one, but there's also that saying of like become the one. So oftentimes you have to experience more of like the positive individuality in order to feel like that sense of connection is there, because you have to know yourself to know what kinds of relationships feel good to you. And so that's like another example of how you can use this kind of opposites idea to actually reach your current goals. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button down below and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Also, leave me a comment down below. And if you would like a free resource called the 5 Reasons for Self-Sabotage, I'm going to go ahead and link that down below in the description box, and you can just go ahead and click there and get that resource. Also, if you would like to learn more about shadow work and inner work in general, go ahead and click this video right here and check that out. And until next time, keep becoming more you.